my name's Taylor Rote. I'm a manager in our Chambersburg office. And for this presentation, I'll be going over some tips and tricks of everyone's favorite Microsoft application, and that's Excel. So if you all use Excel as much as I do, I'm sure maybe you've had more headaches than not, but hopefully some of these tricks that we go over will help to alleviate that. So just a quick overview of what we'll be discussing. I'll start by going over some formatting tips, specifically on flattening an Excel file. And then I'll go over some additional data analysis functions, some other useful tools in Excel, and then wrap up with the quick access toolbar in Excel. Before being able to perform some of the more advanced functions in Excel, you may need to format your file or report into what I will refer to as a flat file. So what is a flat file? A flat file is essentially a collection of data in Excel, and it's stored within rows and columns. But particularly important is that there are no breaks or blank cells in between those rows and columns, which unfortunately is not the case when you export most of your reports from your accounting software. So without this format, you're not easily able to filter or perform a lot of the other data analysis functions that I'll go over later in this presentation. So on the next slide, again, it'll be that video and audio of me flattening a file. It'll actually be a QuickBooks file for my example, but you can really apply these tips that I'll be going over on reports exported from any accounting software.
So in this example, I reconstructed a general ledger detail in the QuickBooks format, which, as you can see, is not very user-friendly in the sense that you cannot easily filter or search for individual transactions, and that's based on the breaks in the columns here and then in the rows, and also the fact that the columns are not fully populated. So in order to flatten this file, there are a couple of steps that we can take, with the first one being to get all of the accounts in the same column. So if you're familiar with QuickBooks and a lot of other accounting softwares, some of the reports that you run may have information spread across multiple columns. So in this case, that would be the accounts, specifically for those account types with subaccounts. So in this example, if you scroll down, you'll see some of the accounts are listed in column A, some in column B, and then also if you keep scrolling in column C. So as opposed to scrolling through the entire report, another quick way to tell if a column or a row contains cells with inputs would be to use the count tool at the bottom. If you were to highlight column A here, you'll see the count at the bottom right-hand corner here showing value cells of 12. Then you can do the same for columns B and C and easily see that there are value cells included in those columns. So in order to easily get all of the accounts in a single column, you'll first want to copy the columns with the information you are trying to combine on a new tab. So we'll do that here and go to sheet, a separate sheet. From there, you'll want to highlight just your first column and copy all of the blank cells in order to delete those cells and shift the information included in the next cell over to the left. Now, opposed to scrolling through and manually highlighting and deleting all of those cells, there is a much quicker way to do this. So again, you'll first want to highlight the column, and then you'll use the drop down under the Find and Select icon and go to Special. And then from there, you can select blanks, and this will then only highlight the blank cells in the area that you have highlighted. Now you are able to right-click and then select Delete, which will then give you the option to shift cells over to the left, thereby bringing any information that was in column B to column A and so on. And then you'll want to do this same function as many times as it takes to get all of the information over to column A. So in this case, that's just one more time. And you can do a quick check to see that columns B and C now show a count of 0 and therefore don't have any cells with information in them. So now that everything is in one column, we can copy this back over to the general ledger on the first tab here and delete columns B and C since this information is now in column A. Next, you'll notice that all of the accounts are in column A, but they are not populated in the rows to line up with each individual transaction. And therefore, this is not considered a flat file. So QuickBooks does have the option to drag information to subsequent rows, as you can see there. However, that is inefficient in this case, as you would essentially have to manually stop and restart this at each change in account. So instead, there is a quick formula in Excel that will populate all of the rows with the appropriate account. And honestly, this is a trick I use more often than you would expect in Excel, and it significantly cuts down on data entry time. So to do this, you'll want to start by again selecting all of the blanks in column A from the Go to Special option like we did previously. Then, because we are using a formula, you'll actually want to switch the input from text to general, otherwise the cell will not recognize it as an actual formula. And you don't want to click on a specific cell now that everything's highlighted, but instead you can just start typing your formula and it will automatically populate in the first cell of our highlighted range. So for this, we will want to type in the equal sign, and then you'll want to push the up arrow on your keyboard. And what this does is it highlights the cell above, meaning the information in that first blank cell will be the exact same as the cell above it. From there, then, if you hold down the Control key on your keyboard and press Enter, this then populates all of the highlighted cells with the same formula, and you'll see then, if you scroll down, that it picks up all of the changes in accounts. Now, another trick in Excel, and I actually use this quite often, would be to change these formulas back to values. So I'm sure any of you that work in Excel often know that with formulas, in Excel, it can cause a lot of issues if you end up copying that cell elsewhere, or if you make a change in a cell that the formula is linked to. So for example, if you were to accidentally delete the information in this cell, everything would be adjusted. So to avoid this, we can change all of these formulas back to a value by using the paste special option. So you'll want to highlight the cells you want to change. So I'll just highlight this whole column here and then select copy. And then you can go to the drop down in your paste option and select paste special. And from there, you can select value, which changes any cell with a formula to just the output of that formula. So you can see now, even if we were to delete that account, it doesn't matter. And all of those essentially stay the same as it's text instead of a formula. So like I said, I use that trick pretty often, and it can be really helpful in a number of situations, not just this one. Okay, so in order to finish flattening this file, you'll just want to go ahead and manually delete any blank column breaks in order to be able to apply a filter to this information. So you can just highlight those columns and right click on your mouse and select delete. So now you have a clean file that you are able to apply a filter to, which I have mine in my quick access toolbar, which we'll go over later. And as you can see, with this filter now, you're able to easily search, filter, or sort all of these transactions.
Okay, so again, that was an example just out of a QuickBooks file, but you really can use those processes for any report pulled from any accounting software. And again, that may have been review or refresher for some of you, but it is imperative those flat files to have no breaks in columns in order to be able to perform some of the other data analysis functions that I will go over next. So again, I have a few videos kind of going over these functions, but I will just briefly go over the purpose of each one. So we'll first go over XLOOKUP, and that function allows you just to quickly pull similar information from one table range to another using a common value. And then pivot tables, those are a great tool to summarize and analyze financial information or large data sets. And then the quick analysis tool, that just has a bunch of different functions, again, to help analyze data, but all in one place. So we'll start with XLOOKUP.
Okay, so we'll start with XLOOKUP, which is actually a somewhat new function that was introduced to Excel just a couple of years ago. So this was essentially designed to replace the other functions, lookup functions, VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP, and it allows you to look up data both horizontally and vertically, or through rows and columns. So there are plenty of ways that this can be used if you're trying to look up specific information in a data set. But in this example, let's say you are looking up trial balances from 2 separate years and want to pull the current year-end balance to the table with the prior year-end balance to compare. So you'll see here I have a mock TB from 2020 and then a mock TB from 2021 on the second tab. And I'm actually going to plug another cool Excel trick in here, and that is the duplicate view function. So this helps if you're using various different tabs within one spreadsheet and you want them in separate screens so that you don't have to switch back and forth. So you'll just go to the View tab, like I just showed you, and under Window, you'll click New Window, and essentially that just pulls the same spreadsheet just in a different file, and now we can use both tabs here in the same view. So again, you're not having to kind of switch back and forth, and you can actually do formulas between them as well, like I'll show you now. So to look up the balance from 2021 and pull it to the 2020 table, again, we'll use the XLOOKUP tool, which this is essentially, it's using a common denominator, which in our case, we'll use the account number to pull that data related to that account number from another table. So start by typing in XLOOKUP in the cell, and then the first argument of the formula asks for your lookup value. Since we are pulling data based on the account number, that would be cell C2 for us. And then the next argument is the lookup array, which would be in the other list that we are looking up the values in. So for here, you would want to highlight the account information. Again, you can jump between tabs here, even with the formula. And then finally, you have your return array, which will be the value you want returned based on the lookup value. And the rest of the formula doesn't really matter because this function automatically goes to an exact match, which means it will only pull data if the account numbers are exactly the same. And as you can see, when you hit enter there, it pulled the 2021 balance related to that account number from this table. You can then drop down this formula to the rest of the rows, but you'll first want to make sure that your table array is a constant reference, which is what I just did there with the dollar signs in front of the row and column references, and that essentially means that the table range won't shift down a cell when you pull down the formulas and therefore not include all the data. So then you'll see you can just pull down the formula and quickly get all of the information from the other table. I will mention too, if NA comes up in your formula, that just means that the account number or value you were searching for does not exist in the other table. So, like I mentioned, the X lookup function differs from others in that it can look up information both horizontally and vertically. So, obviously, we just looked up values vertically, but I'll just quickly show you the horizontal option. So, let's say you want to look up the fund name based on the fund number in a table. You'll type in that same formula, but the lookup and the return arrays, as you can see, is pulling from a table that is horizontal instead of vertical. And you'll see that still pulls the information in the same way. It's just a new technique, again, that Excel didn't have prior to 2020 and is specific to this X lookup function. So the example we're going to use to show the functionality of a pivot table is a mock capital asset detail that you can see has already been flattened, as all of the rows and columns contain information that can be easily filtered and also can be used for the pivot table to assist with data analytics. So a pivot table is an easy tool that can isolate and summarize information for a large data set based on certain attributes. Examples of this for a capital asset report might be to summarize total costs of all assets placed in service in a certain year. It could be to summarize depreciation expense by asset type, or summarize fully depreciated assets to review for potential disposal or impairment. For our example, though, I'm going to create a pivot table that summarizes total asset costs based on the year that asset was placed in service. So what you'll want to do is go to the Insert tab at the top of your toolbar and click on the first icon titled Pivot Table. This brings up the option to select the data range you are analyzing. So I'll go ahead and highlight the entire capital asset detail, making sure to include the column headers, as these are the attributes that we'll use to summarize the information. Then you can click OK, and a new tab will appear with your blank pivot table with a display on the right-hand side that allows you to select which fields you would like to include in your pivot table. So these fields should link up with the column headers within your data set. Again, for our example, we're looking at total asset cost per year placed in service. So we'll want to select the year in service. And I'll mention, because that is technically a value, it will automatically show up in the value field. But because we are summarizing other values based on this year, we'll want to move this over to the box labeled rows, which you can do so just by manually dragging. And then you'll see it'll show up as your row label here. Then you'll select the cost of the asset under the field selection again up here, and it will automatically show up as the sum of the costs of the assets placed in service for that particular year in the rows. So like I said, the values are set to automatically calculate the sum, but there are other options as well. If you go to the value field settings, which you can do by clicking on that arrow, and it'll pull up the option of value field settings. So like I said, you can see you have other options. You can summarize values by sum, as shown here, the count, average of the cost, max, min, a bunch of different options there. In addition to summarizing those values, you can also choose to show the values as a formula. So right now there's no calculation selected, but you can choose to show those values as a percentage of the grand total of asset costs, just the percentage of the row totals, running totals, rank smallest to largest, etc. A lot of options there as well. Another cool function of a pivot table is that by double clicking on a row within a pivot table, it will extract just the information related to that row from your total data table on the separate tab. So if I wanted to look at the specific detail of the assets placed in service in 2012, I can double click on that row in the pivot table and you'll see a new sheet is created with all of the detailed information just for those assets attributable to that pivot table row. Say then you want to summarize or analyze different information. You don't necessarily have to create a new pivot table. You can instead just uncheck your initial selections in your field settings and choose different fields add to your report. So, for example, if I wanted to see current year depreciation expense by asset type, I would select type as my row label and then current depreciation as my value, and it instantly sums the depreciation by type. So overall, there's a lot you can do with a pivot table, and I definitely didn't touch on all of it, but hopefully that brief introduction shows the capabilities and the usefulness of this tool in analyzing financial information.
So if you've ever been to presentations in the past, Bill Oyster, he would always try to throw some humor in here. This was my attempt at it. So if we have any Friends fans in attendance, that's for that.
So another really cool data analysis tool that's built into Excel that I wanted to go over is the quick analysis tool. So say you have a data set that you want to analyze. In this case, a very high level table of revenues broken out by revenue streams in the rows and then also by month in the columns. So if you highlight your table, you'll notice an icon pop up in the bottom right-hand corner with a lightning bolt there. And you'll click on this icon and that brings up the quick analysis tool. And this lets you quickly analyze the data with some of Excel's most useful tools. And that includes charts, formulas, color coding, etc. So I'll just quickly go over a couple of these. If you just hover over the icon, it shows you the different options. So you can format your table with data bars based on the balances. You can color code the data, use an icon set to highlight interesting data within. There's a chart option where you can do line, bar graphs, all of those. And if you click on those, it'll essentially just bring that chart into the tab that you're working on. There's a totals tab where if you hover over, it automatically calculates the sum, the average, count, percentages total, just a bunch of really cool options in here, again, for data analysis. A quick option instead of going through the separate tabs at the top.
So those were just a few tricks related to data analysis. Obviously, Excel has a multitude of functions that I wouldn't be able to hit on just in 30 minutes, but hopefully some of those you would find useful. The next section here just goes over a couple of other useful tips and tricks that I found in Excel. That includes the flash and autofill function, 3D references, and then we'll end with customizing your own quick access toolbar.
Starting with flash fill and autofill, these are functions in Excel that are real-time savers for data entry. So in the first example, we have account numbers broken out by fund, function, and object in different columns. So say you want to quickly combine these into one cell and separate them using a dash symbol. Well, using flash fill by typing in the first string of numbers, Excel will essentially instantly recognize a pattern and it'll give you the option to fill the rest of the rows in your data set. So for example, I again want to combine the values in the first 3 columns, but separate them with a dash. So you can type in that first cell, hit enter, and then when you begin to type in that second cell or that second row, again, it'll pick up that pattern, and Excel will give you the option to flash fill the remaining rows all by hitting enter on your keyboard. So you just hit enter there and everything will pre-populate into the remaining rows. This isn't a fill function, but there's also a formula that would essentially do the same thing called concatenate. And I'll I'll show you how to do that here as well, just because it is a pretty useful formula in stringing text or different cells together. So to use this formula, you would type in the concatenate, you would select the text that you first want to add into the cell. Again, say we want to combine these using a dash, so you would type that in quotations, type in the next text you want, again, another dash, and then you would choose your object. Sorry, I didn't click the comma there. You add a comma and put in the object. Then again, it essentially strings together those three cells into one, and then you can pull that down through the formula as well. So another really useful tool in order to combine data in separate cells into one. Back to the fill functions. So autofill is very similar to the flash fill in Excel, where Excel is recognizing a pattern in what you're typing, and this can be used for numbers, months, weekdays, actual dates, etc. So I'll show you that here, and let's just start with numerical order. So say you're looking to number a list of some type. Really, all you have to do is type in the first two numbers, and then you'll pull using that drop-down box, and you'll see that Excel is auto-filling the next number in sequence in order. Again, same, you can use that for months. You just need to type the first two, and Excel will recognize the pattern and fill in sequentially in order. Weekdays as well, as you can see. Actually, for weekdays, you may need to type in the full name. Sometimes it can be wonky if you use abbreviations, but you'll see there weeks in order, and then I'll show you dates lastly. Your type in dates, go in order of the calendar, obviously. So again, just really, really cool functions here that can save a lot of time with data entry. Throughout the various examples we went over, you may have noticed me using a separate toolbar within my Excel workbooks, and that would be this toolbar right here. So this is made up of icons that you can customize based on the tools and functions that you use most in your day-to-day. So this toolbar, it allows you to select those different icons and functions from each of the different tabs here and drop downs, and have them, again, all in one place. We have some Excel wizards within our firm that were nice enough to set up a customization file with some of the most used and popular functions that I could just import directly into my own ribbon, but otherwise you can customize your toolbar manually, and that is what I'll show you how to do next. So to set up your own quick access toolbar, you'll want to go to File and then down to the Options. And from here, you'll see the quick access toolbar option on the left-hand side. And there's two different sides here. These would be all of the options that you can choose. And then on the right-hand side here is your personal toolbar. So as you can see, you can drop down here and you can kind of sort the commands between by the popular commands, any commands not already included in your own ribbon. And then you can also kind of sort them by the different tabs if it's easier to find that way. So go to commands that I don't already have in my own ribbon. And so for example, say I want to add the back function to my own ribbon. So I'll just highlight that function, and then you can click add, and it'll automatically go over to your own personal ribbon. You can also move and place where you want the certain icons to show in your toolbar using the up and down arrows here. So that'll just place it in the order that it appears on your ribbon. Also, something to note is if you do go ahead and customize your own ribbon and you have a number of different functions in there, it would likely be a good idea to keep this option checked, the one that says show quick access toolbar below the ribbon. Otherwise, like I'll show you here, all of the functions will go up to the top of your Excel sheet, and it gets pretty clustered up there. So I would recommend keeping that option checked in order to keep your toolbar below that ribbon.
Hopefully, you guys learned some new tips and tricks. I realized that was a lot of information. I saw some people taking notes. Again, we kind of did the videos here because we'll be sending out the slides and you'll have these videos to reference when you're actually in Excel and using these functions to follow along. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now, or my contact information is up there. I'll pass it on to the next presentation here.